The following program is a presentation of the Civil War Broadcasting Network. It is available on the free YouTube channel Dr. E.C. Fields, also available on Facebook page Kurt Fields as General Ulysses S. Grant, and various other social media. Permission to copy and distribute and share is granted. Indeed, it's encouraged. The Civil War Broadcasting Network would like to remind you that you are the future of our past. The CWBN would also like to extend its gratitude to Dr. Ned Lodwick of Georgetown, Ohio, and Mr. Steve Thompson of Mattoon, Illinois, for their significant contributions to this program. And now, Colonel Grant, First Command. I'm Colonel Ulysses S. Grant, Colonel as of today, with the swearing in of the 21st Illinois Regiment. I now have a command. I have been for the last 2 months gravely concerned that I would get no such command. I've been trying to do this, attain this rank since April the 16th. Although the 2 months has been short chronologically, I would like to share with you the journey that I've had fraught with impact and events. We heard of the news of Fort Sumter on April 15th, and Galena was agog with the uproar and hubbub of war. Lincoln had called for 75,000 volunteers, so we had a town meeting on the night of April 16th. It was a stem winder, I'll tell you. And at that 16th meeting, it was decided that there would be another meeting on April 18th, 2 nights hence, to recruit for what would be the Joe Davis Guards of Joe Davis County. Walking home that night on the 16th, though, I was with my brother Orville, with whom I worked in our leather shop, and he said, "I expect you'll be going back in the Army, Liz." And I was glad he said that, because it gave me the opportunity to reply that, yes, I expect so. I thought I was done with the military. I had done with it. I never dreamed I'd ever be in the Army again. Yet this has happened, and I feel like the country that educated me and trained me, if it is in need of that education and my services, then they should be offered. And Orville agreed and said, "I'll stay here and run the store while you are at war." And I never went back into our leather goods store there in Galena. Never again. No, not even to wrap a package or do any business. It was behind me. I was done with it. The night of April the 18th, we had the meeting, and much to my astonishment, I was called upon to chair that meeting. And I did so reluctantly, but the local paper printed what I said when I stood up and talked to those recruits, all excited, all wanting to get into the war and fight for the Union. But I made a sobering statement to them and said, "Before calling upon you to be volunteers, I wish to state just what will be required of you. First of all, unquestioning obedience to your superior officers. The Army is not a picnicking party, nor is it an excursion. You will have hard fare. You will be obliged to sleep on the ground after long marches in the rain and snow. Many of the orders of your superiors will seem to you unjust, and yet they must be borne. If an injustice is really done you, however, there are courts martial where your wrongs can be investigated and offenders punished. If you put your name down here, it should be in full understanding of what that act means. In conclusion, Let me say that so far as I can, I will aid the company, and I intend to re-enlist in the service myself. We had 22 young men to sign up for the Army that night, and I was gratified. Well, they offered me a captaincy in the Joe Davis Guards, and I turned it down. I said I'd been a captain in the regular United States Army, and to take a captain's rank in a volunteer regiment would actually be a step backward. And I also thought that there was more in the war for me than to join a volunteer regiment and serve under a green colonel. That idea galled me. So I trained the regiment or the company. I sketched the uniforms for the ladies of the town and showed them what fabric to buy. They sewed the uniforms for the young men, dark blue coats over gray trousers with blue piping down the side, and drilled them pretty thoroughly. When they left Galena on April 25th on the cars to go to Camp Yates in Springfield, I went too, but I did not march with the company. I went in after they did and quietly got on the train. I thought about what I had said during that year in Galena about my position towards secession. And I said this: secession was never possessed at all by Florida or the states west of the Mississippi, all of which were purchased by the Treasury of the United States. Texas and the territory brought into the Union in consequence of annexation were purchased with both blood and treasure. So that was my position about secession. But we left on the 25th of April. We had a slow trip. We had to stop at every town, speeches and cheers and so forth. And we did not get to Springfield until the next day on the 26th. And the 27th, I went to see Governor Yates because my congressman, Elihu Washburn, had told me he's got something for you. And it turned out that Governor Yates and Congressman Washburn were on the outs politically at that time. Also, there was a flood of office seekers and wire pullers and influence peddlers, and the governor was swamped. Indeed, he had a gatekeeper, Augustus Corner, and Mr. Corner is a German immigrant who came to America and did very well. In fact, he served in the Illinois legislature, and that's where the governor met him. I wound up speaking to Mr. Corner, and Mr. Corner was not impressed with me. In fact, he was later quoted as saying, in describing me, hardly of medium height, broad-shouldered and rather short-necked. His features did not indicate any high grade of intellectuality. He was indifferently dressed, I was wearing this, and did not at all look like a military man. He said, "Call again." And I was much discouraged. I waited in town a day or so, and then the night of the 28th, I had dinner in the Chinnery House, where really the only place in town to stay, boarding house, hotel, and Governor Yates, whom I did not know, but I recognized him, came up to me while I was on the front steps smoking a cigar after dinner and said, "Captain Grant," addressed me by my old Army rank. And he said, "I understand that you're about to go back to Galena." And I said, "Yes, I've got a ticket for the 9 o'clock train, 9 p.m. And he said, "If you can, don't do that. Come see me in the morning. I may have something for you." Now, I was much interested in this, not the least that he knew my name and my rank. We'd never met, and that I was leaving town. So I suspect the hand of Elihu Washburn is in this. But the next morning, I was in the governor's office. and on the 29th, and he had something for me. He asked me to help set up the Illinois State Adjutant General's office. Now, up until that time, it had been really only a titled position, but it paid $500 a year. And the job in total required of one to sweep out the armory twice a year. And for that, one got $500. The current Adjutant General was an insurance man named Tom Mathers. And Mr. Mather had no idea of what to do. And they didn't really have any idea of what to do with me. I was an independent contractor, a vendor, and they they found an old table that had three legs, and they shoved it up against a wall under the staircase there in the State House, and gave me a chair, and I began making out forms and instructing clerks what to do and how to process the paperwork. And that's about all I did. I was going to go home, and because I said a child could do this, can rule lines on a paper and make forms out. But Congressman Washburn prevailed on me to stay. I'm glad I did, because on May the 4th, John Pope, Captain Pope, who had been the mustering officer for the state and was in command of Camp Yates, quit abruptly and went to St. Louis because he'd been expecting to become a brigadier general. Illinois had just authorized 10 more regiments and a battalion of light artillery, and John Pope, who was still in the Army, was expecting to be made brigadier general, and he was not. Well, he quit in a huff and went to St. Louis seeking higher command, which he indeed got. But the governor turned to me and asked me to command Camp Yates, and I happily did so. But I didn't make any more money. I was only making my $2 a day. That lasted for 4 days until May the 8th, and then I was made an official mustering officer. And as I said, Illinois had to muster in 10 regiments and a battalion of light artillery. When I was made mustering officer, I began making $4 a day, and I delegated the mustering in duties for 7 of those regiments in the central and northern part of the state. And I decided to go to the southern part of the state, the area known as Egypt, and muster in those 3 regiments, one in Mattoon, Belleville, and Anna, Illinois. So on May the 9th, I got to Mattoon, and the men were not all assembled and ready to be sworn in. So I took advantage of that time. They said it'd be several days. I went across the river and into St. Louis because I wanted to see Nathaniel Lyon, whom I'd been at West Point for a couple of years, and possibly Frank Blair of St. Louis, quite a political man and some influence. And I did see Blair. I got to talk to him, but it was in the beginning of the movement that Nathaniel Lyon had initiated of federal troops there in the St. Louis arsenal to go out to the city limits and seize Camp Jackson, which had been a hotbed of secessionists, state militia, so forth. And Captain Lyon had gotten word that they were going to come from the outskirts of town in and seize the arsenal there in St. Louis with all of the weapons in it. He took the action, preemptive action, which was, by the way, way beyond his authority. But he captured Camp Jackson and seized the federal arsenal. Now, his action in doing that, while may have been something he didn't have the rank to do, his action saved the arsenal and the weapons there, and quite probably St. Louis and Missouri for the Union. So he acted out of rank, but the result was profound. Moreover, he, under cover of night, after he seized the arsenal, had those arms taken down to the river, sent across the river, and they were all sent to Springfield, Illinois, Camp Yates. And that's where the troops there in Illinois got their weapons, from what Lyon had seized at the St. Louis arsenal. But I didn't get to see anyone to push my cause. I had originally told John Pope in Springfield a few days ago, I don't need permission to seek to serve my country, to fight for my country, because John had offered to use his family influence and his influence to get an appointment for me. Well, I was indignant. I thought, well, I can do this on my own. I was perfectly sick of wire pullers and influence peddlers and would have none of it. A few days later, though, realizing I have no political connections, I don't know anyone, and no one knows me except, say, perhaps Elihu Washburn, my congressman. And men all around me are getting colonelcies and even higher ranks, and I'm getting nothing. I'm a mustering officer at $4 a day and not making any headway, and I'm convinced this is going to be a short war. And if I don't get into the Army and into the fight, I'm going to miss it. So I went looking for people in St. Louis that might help me. I saw some great excitement, the saving of the arsenal, but I made no progress for myself. I went back across the river, and on the 11th, I mustered in the regiment at Belleville, and also in that time frame, Anna. On the 15th of May, I mustered in the camp, or the regiment, at the Mattoon, Illinois camp. And I was there a couple of days, drilling them, working with them. And I was very pleased when I left them after just a couple of days. They named their camp after me. They named it Camp Grant. It's the first time I've ever been mentioned militarily with an honor of any sort. But the Mattoon camp in Mattoon, Illinois is named Camp Grant. But I went back to Springfield at that time. I finished my mustering in duties. The other regiments had been mustered in, and I collected my pay of $130, which was badly needed, because now we're into the middle of May. I've been involved in this since the middle of April, and I've received no pay. And I've been borrowing on my salary at the store back in Galena. Well, I was waiting for something to happen. In fact, one newspaper man asked me in that time period after I'd gotten paid that, "What are you doing, Captain Grant?" And I said, "I'm waiting. I'm just waiting." On the 23rd of May, I asked Governor Yates for some leave to go back to Galena. It's been 5 weeks since I've been home, and I needed to see my family, and I needed to take care of some matters there. So I went back to Galena. On the 23rd, when I got there, Mr. Horace Houghton of the Northwestern Gazette, a weekly paper there in Galena, interviewed me, wanted to talk with me, and I happily did so. He seemed to be impressed with me because in the article he wrote following my interview, he said this about me: "We are now in want of just such soldiers as he is, and we hope the government will invite him to higher command. He is the very soul of honor, and no man breathes who has a more patriotic heart. We want among our young soldiers the influence of the rare leadership of men like Captain Grant." I was very pleased. I might also say, since it's the only time I've ever been mentioned in the newspaper, it's the first time in the war that I have been mentioned in a newspaper, and it was very complimentary. On the 24th the next day, I sat down and, so to speak, I put pen to paper and wrote the Adjutant General of the United States Army an application for a commission. I was reluctant and I was very humble in what I said, but in my brief letter, I said to Colonel Lorenzo Thomas, the Adjutant General for the Army, "Sir, having served for 15 years in the regular Army, including 4 years at West Point, and feeling it the duty of everyone who has been educated at the government expense to offer their services for the support of that government, I have the honor, very respectfully, to tender my services until the close of the war in such capacity as may be offered. I would say, in view of my present age and length of service, I feel myself competent to command a regiment. If the President, in his judgment, should see fit to entrust one to me. Since the first call of the President, I have been serving on the staff of the governor of the state, rendering such aid as I could in the organization of our state militia, and am still engaged in that capacity. A letter addressed to me at Springfield, Illinois will reach me. I am very respectfully your obedient servant, U.S. Grant." As of June the 18th, this date, I have not heard from Adjutant General Thomas, but I certainly hope that I may, and I can proudly tell him I am already in service in command of a regiment. So I went back to Camp Yates and Springfield, Illinois, on May the 30th, and again spent time. I was waiting, hopefully, to get a command of some sort and killing time. On June the 9th, though, after those few days, I again asked the governor to give me some leave because I wanted to go see my parents in Covington, Kentucky, and that was granted. I got to Covington, Kentucky on June the 9th, but it is very conveniently located across the river from Cincinnati, Ohio, which is where now Major General George McClellan is in command and has his headquarters for the Department of Ohio. And I went to see George. I knew him from the academy. I had worked with him out at California when he came out at Fort Vancouver rather, when he came out to survey potential railroad routes across the country for the Transcontinental Railroad. I really wanted a spot on his staff, maybe to command a cavalry unit of some sort, but I badly wanted George McClellan to give me a position. I went to visit him in his office on June the 10th and again on June the 11th, and I sat there for 2 days waiting to see him, being told he's busy. And after 2 days of that, I got the message and went back, told my parents I'm going back to Springfield. But before I left, while I was there, I talked to Chilton White, who was a boyhood friend, who's now a state representative. And I talked to him. We'd served in the Mexican War, and I talked to him about how I baked the bread so successfully in the Mexican War and had made money for the regiment, and was trying to get a contract through him to bake bread for the Ohio troops. I also said, when he said, "Why don't you get a regiment? Why don't you get a command?" And I said, "I am desperately trying to get a command." And he said, "Well, I know the governor. I knew the governor, William Dennison, and my father has always been a politician, so I knew Governor Dennison." And Chilton White said, "Let me talk to the governor. Perhaps we can find you a command." But I went back to Springfield, but I stopped near Indianapolis to visit with Joe Reynolds, a classmate of mine at West Point. He taught math at Washington University in St. Louis, had gone back to Indiana, near Indianapolis, and become quite a substantial grocer. And I talked to him about getting possibly a regiment command in Indiana, and he promised to help. But while I was there, on June the 15th, I got the telegram from Governor Yates that had been sent to my parents' home in Covington, saying that he'd appointed me as colonel of the 21st Illinois. This came as quite a shock. I was glad to get it, but I'd mustered them in. They'd elected Simon Good, a city clerk from Decatur, Illinois, as their colonel. He hadn't worked out. So the regiment was tearing up Mattoon. They were sent to, upon pleas to get them out of here, put on the train, sent to Camp Yates. They were equally as unbehaved at Camp Yates, put in the guardhouse, many of them. They burned down the guardhouse. They mutinied over bad bread. There wasn't a chicken house within 3 or 4 miles of Springfield, Illinois, that still had any chickens or geese. So they had gotten the name Yates Hellions. And they contacted Governor Yates and said, we want you to appoint another commander. We're not going to serve with Colonel Good. And he said, I'm not going to appoint anybody. Come see me and tell me who you want. So a delegation of all of the officers went to visit with Governor Yates at Springfield, and he again said, who do you want? The only name that came up was mine. They said, we want Captain Grant to command our regiment. And they chose me over 10 lieutenants and 2 field grade officers. And they said, he's the one we want. Governor Yates at that time said, all right. And he sent me a telegram saying, I have appointed you colonel of the 21st Illinois. And I got that on the 15th. I replied on the 16th and returned to Springfield. I got back to Springfield on June the 17th. Now, another issue that I'm having to struggle with is, yes, I've got a colonelcy. I've got my own regiment. But the problem is that I mustered in Mattoon back on May 15th, almost 1,200 men. Now, on June the 17th, a month later, there are a little more than 600 left. The rest have just gone. Some of them may have joined other units. Most of them, I think, just went home. But my 1,200 mustering in number is down to between 600 and 700. They're all very unhappy with the Army, and they're grumbling about wanting to go home. Their 30 days are about to be up. So I've got the exhilaration of being named a colonel. I've got my own regiment, and my regiment's about to disappear on me. And what's to become of me then? I'll be a colonel with no regiment to command. And while in Springfield there on the 17th, I was with a friend, and 2 men approached. It turned out both of them were Illinois congressmen, Democratic congressmen. One of them was John A. McClernand, and the other was John A. Logan. Well, they had heard about what was going on with my regiment, and McClernand says, let us speak to your men to inspire them to re-enlist. I'm a little wary of Congressman McClernand, I will tell you. Our paths may cross again in the war, but it seems to me I've got a whiff of Colonel or Congressman McClernand may be more interested in career than country. I don't know, but I have that feeling, that intuitive feeling. Logan, John A. Logan, wants to speak, and I was very concerned about that because Logan represents the area of Illinois, southernmost area called Egypt, populated largely by Southerners who have come from Kentucky and others, Tennessee, other states, into Illinois. In fact, when Sumter was fired upon, many of those men in his district there in Egypt, in southern Illinois, actually went across the river and joined the Confederate forces. Logan had, back in February, actually made a speech in Congress urging conciliation and compromise with the states that were seceding. And this, of course, caused an outrage among Union supporters. He had even been a secessionist, and he was in favor of secession and the South. He has not made a statement, and his silence is becoming thundering. And the Unionist papers are all yelling for him to make a statement. Where do you stand? Are you for the Union or are you for the South? What are you going to do, Congressman? And here's the man looking at me saying, I want to speak to your troops and encourage them to re-enlist. And I'm thinking, I don't know what you are going to say. I don't know who you are. I do know your background. And I'm very concerned that you're going to use the signing up of my regiment for 3 years or the war as a platform to make a political statement about which way you go in the war. But what can I say? They're both personal friends of President Lincoln. I had no choice. I agreed. So the next day, on June the 18th of 1861, we're on the review stand. Congressman Logan, Congressman McClernand, myself. Well, Congressman McClernand got up and talked for about 2 hours, as I recall. He went on and on. As I said earlier about the 16th of April in Galena, he gave a knee-slapping stem winder. I'm telling you, he wound them up. They were in cheers. And in fact, he said, the local paper has it quoted, and when he introduced Congressman Logan, he said in his best classical Greco-Roman language, and in conclusion, having said this much, allow me, Illinoisans, to present to you my friend and colleague in Congress, the Honorable John A. Logan. He is gifted with eloquence and will rouse you to feel as the Athenians felt under the eloquence of Demosthenes. They asked immediately to be led against Philip and pulled Congressman Logan to the stand, to the fore. And Logan spoke for about 2 hours as well. I was very pleased. I am happy to tell you that he made a wonderful speech in support of the Union and against secession, and inspired those men. They'd been wound up pretty well from McClernand, but Logan waxed as eloquent as I have ever heard a man speak. And they were all ready to sign up. I mean, they wanted to sign up then. And Logan says at the end of his talk, he said, you can't give up now. What are you going to do when you get back home? If you go home now and you haven't fought in the war, it'll sound like this. You go home and Mary is going to say, are you back so soon, John? And you'll say, yes, I am, Mary. And she'll say, well, how far did you go, John? And you'll say, Mattoon. And that really broke them up and got the laughter out of them. And then he turned around and said, and now, men, and he pulled me up to the front of the stand. I now present to you your new colonel and commanding officer, Colonel Ulysses S. Grant. And they all began clamoring, speech, speech, give a speech. Colonel Grant, give a speech. And I put my hands on the railing and I said, men, go to your quarters. And turned around and walked away to attend to my business. I'm happy to say that they signed up out of the 650 or so men that were still there and heard the speeches of McClernand and Logan, that all but I think 22, well over 600 men, and they signed up for 3 years or the war. and I had a regiment, and we began working in earnest with the drilling and the training. I understand that on the 28th of this month instant, in 10 more days, that the regiment is going to be brought into the United States Army as an official regiment, and they'll no longer be Illinois militia. So that gratifies me greatly. I should also like to tell you that at the beginning of the war, there were only 16,000 or so enlisted men and about 1,100 officers. And of those officers, so far, 400 of them or so have gone into various state militias. 313 of them went south, and about 115 went into the regular federal service. And those are the numbers: 16,000 enlisted, about 11,000 officers. And the breakdown of the officers, virtually none of the 16,000 enlisted men went south. They all stayed in the Union. So that's my journey from being Captain Grant, working in Grant's leather store in Galena, Illinois for 11 months, to Colonel Grant, back in the Army, and for the first time, I have my own command, a regiment, the 21st Illinois. I think I shall see good things from them, but we'll have to wait and see as the war unfolds. So, for now, that's all of the recollections that I should like to have with you at this time. I must be about in the camp and attend to my business. I bid you good day.